Chapter 1. The Fall of the Starliner. The Starliner Horizon, once the pride of interstellar luxury travel, was a marvel of engineering. Its hull gleamed like polished silver under distant starlight, and its corridors were filled with a mix of humans and aliens, their laughter and conversations blending into a harmonious hum. Over 4,000 passengers roamed its expansive decks, enjoying everything from zero-gravity lounges to simulated ocean beaches. For Jason Reed, the Horizon was a way-out transport ship to his new life on Gerion Prime, where he hoped to start fresh as an engineer for a terraforming project. He hadn't expected much from the journey beyond cheap meals and crowded quarters, but when he met Arya Zevin, everything changed. Arya was a Zelithrane species known for their striking silver skin and bioluminescent markings that pulsed faintly with their emotions. She was seated across from Jason in the common dining hall, her violet eyes scanning a data pad as she absent-mindedly poked at her food. Jason had never been good at starting conversations, but something about her drew him in. "You're not from around here, are you?" he had asked, instantly cringing at his own awkwardness. She glanced up, her markings pulsing faintly in a mix of curiosity and amusement. "No, and neither are you." It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Over the next 2 weeks, Jason and Arya spent hours talking about everything from engineering schematics to the peculiarities of human cuisine. Arya was traveling to Valith, 7, a Zelithran colony that had recently joined the Galactic Accord. She was a linguist, specializing in bridging cultural divides, and her sharp wit and calm demeanor intrigued Jason. But their light-hearted conversations came to an abrupt end on the 15th day of their voyage. The catastrophe. The first sign of trouble was a low, grinding sound that reverberated through the ship. Jason was in his cabin, working on a personal project, when the lights flickered and the horizon lurched violently. He stumbled, his heart pounding as the emergency sirens blared. "All passengers, please proceed to the nearest evacuation point," a calm, automated voice announced over the intercom. "This is not a drill." Jason grabbed his emergency pack and bolted into the corridor, joining a panicked crowd surging toward the escape pods. He searched desperately for Arya, but the chaos made it impossible to find her. The ship groaned again, the sound of metal tearing filling the air. Jason glanced out a nearby viewport and felt his stomach drop. A massive, shadowy creature was latched onto the ship, its tendrils ripping through the hull with horrifying ease. Its body pulsed with a sickly green light, and its glowing eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness of space. "What the hell is that?" someone screamed. Jason didn't wait to find out. He sprinted toward the escape pods, but the corridor ahead collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. Trapped, he turned and ran in the opposite direction, hoping to find another route. A desperate escape. Jason's path led him to the lower maintenance decks, far from the evacuation points. He was about to give up when he spotted a familiar figure crouched beside an access panel. "Arya!" he shouted, relief flooding through him. She looked up, her markings glowing with fear and urgency. "Jason, over here." He ran to her, his heart pounding. "What are you doing down here?" "The escape pods are gone," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the panic in her eyes. "The upper decks are compromised. This is the only way." Jason followed her gaze to the open access panel, which led to a narrow maintenance shaft. "You've got to be kidding me. It's either this or wait for that thing to kill us," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jason hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "All right, let's go." They climbed into the shaft, the sound of tearing metal and distant screams echoing behind them. Jason's hands trembled as he crawled through the tight space, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Arya led the way, her bioluminescent markings providing just enough light to see. "Where does this lead?" Jason asked, his voice strained. "To the lower cargo bay," Arya replied. "There's a small shuttle down there, part of the maintenance fleet. If it's still intact, we might have a chance." Jason nodded, focusing on keeping pace with her. The shaft seemed to stretch on forever, the distant sounds of destruction growing louder with each passing moment. Jason's muscles ached, and his breaths came in ragged gasps, but he forced himself to keep moving. Finally, they emerged into the cargo bay, a massive, cavernous space filled with shipping containers and heavy machinery. The dim emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the room, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. "There," Arya said, pointing to a small shuttle nestled against the far wall. Its hull was scorched, but it looked intact. They sprinted toward the shuttle, their footsteps echoing through the bay. Jason could feel his chest tightening, a mix of exhaustion and fear threatening to overwhelm him. But just as they reached the shuttle, the ground shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The creature had found them. Into the belly of the beast. Jason turned, his blood running cold as the massive creature tore through the wall of the cargo bay. Its tendrils writhed, smashing containers and machinery with terrifying ease. Arya grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the shuttle. "Move!" she shouted. They scrambled inside, Jason slamming the hatch shut just as one of the tendrils lashed out. The shuttle rocked violently, but its hull held. Jason stumbled into the pilot's seat, his hands shaking as he activated the controls. Come on," he muttered, the engines sputtering to life. The shuttle lifted off, its thrusters blazing as Jason guided it toward the nearest exit. But before they could escape, the creature's tendrils wrapped around the shuttle, pulling it toward its massive, gaping maw. Jason fought the controls, his heart racing. "It's got us." Arya placed her hands on the console, her markings glowing brightly. "Let it take us." Jason stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. "Are you insane?" "It's the only way," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "If we try to fight it, we'll die. But if we go inside, we might find a way to survive." Jason hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to resist. But something in Arya's gaze, the quiet determination, the unwavering trust made him relent. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do this." The creature's maw closed around the shuttle, plunging them into darkness. Chapter 2. Strangers in the Belly of the Beast. The rhythmic pulsing of the creature's insides echoed in the dim cavern where Ethan and the alien girl, Kalira, had found themselves. The walls shimmered faintly with bioluminescent streaks, casting eerie green and blue glows across their faces. Ethan leaned against the soft, yet firm, wall of the organic chamber, trying to make sense of the situation. "Let me get this straight," Ethan said, still trying to process Kalira's explanation. "We're inside a living creature that roams this planet, and it thinks we're what food?" Kalira adjusted the small, glowing device on her wrist, the alien script flickering across the screen. "Not exactly food," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with frustration. "These creatures are symbiotic predators. They consume materials from the environment, organic and inorganic, but they don't digest everything. They process it." Ethan groaned. "Fantastic. So we're part of a recycling program?" Kalira shot him a sharp look, her silver eyes narrowing. "You're not taking this seriously. This isn't just about us surviving. These creatures are ancient and rare. If we disturb them too much, we risk being expelled or worse." Ethan threw his hands up. "You're saying that like being expelled isn't exactly what we want." Kalira sighed, kneeling to examine the faintly glowing floor. "If we're expelled incorrectly, we could end up in the acidic waste zones. Trust me, that's a fate you don't want." Ethan nodded grimly, his earlier sarcasm fading. "All right, point taken. So, what's the plan?" Kalira straightened, her long, iridescent hair catching the faint glow of the chamber's light. "First, we figure out how far inside the creature we are. Then, we locate its nerve clusters. If we can stimulate the right ones, we might be able to signal the beast to release us safely." Navigating the unknown, the two began their cautious journey deeper into the creature's body, moving through winding tunnels of pulsating walls and chambers filled with strange, jelly-like substances. The air was thick and humid, carrying a faint, musky scent that made Ethan's head spin. Kalira moved with confidence, her every step calculated. Ethan followed close behind, occasionally muttering under his breath as he tried not to slip on the slippery organic floor. "You seem oddly familiar with this place," Ethan said, breaking the tense silence. Kalira hesitated before replying. "My people. We have legends about creatures like this. The Narration. They're considered sacred, protectors of life in harsh environments. To see one alive. It's incredible." Ethan glanced around, his skepticism clear. "Sacred or not, I'm not thrilled about being stuck in its digestive system. Kalira smirked faintly. I never said it would be pleasant. As they pressed on, the chambers began to change. The walls grew softer, the bioluminescent streaks brighter. Strange, translucent sacs hung from the ceilings, pulsing faintly with energy. Ethan stared at them in awe. What are these? He asked, reaching out to touch one. Kalira grabbed his wrist, pulling him back. Don't. Those are nutrient pods. They store excess energy for the creature. If you disturb them, it could trigger a defensive reaction. Ethan nodded, stepping back. Got it. No touching the glowing sacs. A growing bond. Hours passed as they navigated the labyrinth of the creature's insides. Despite the dire circumstances, Ethan found himself growing more curious about Kalira. Her calm demeanor, her deep knowledge of the creature, they hinted at a life far more complex than he'd imagined. So, what were you doing on that Starliner? Ethan asked as they paused in a small chamber to rest. Kalira hesitated, her gaze distant. I was running. My homeworld is at war, and I was trying to reach neutral territory. Ethan frowned. Running from what? The fighting? Kalira shook her head. From those who wanted to use me as a pawn. My family is important. They thought they could trade me for peace. Ethan's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Kalira looked at him, her expression softening. What about you? Why were you on that Starliner? Ethan chuckled bitterly. Nothing nearly as dramatic. I'm just a mechanic trying to make a living. The Starliner job was supposed to be my ticket to something better. Guess the universe had other plans. Kalira smiled faintly. Perhaps the universe brought us here for a reason. Ethan snorted. Yeah, to test our patience. The heart of the beast. Their journey eventually brought them to a massive chamber that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. The walls here were lined with glowing, vein-like structures that radiated warmth. At the center of the chamber was a large, crystalline structure that seemed to pulse in time with the creature's heartbeat. Kalira's eyes widened. This is it, the Narrathin's core. Ethan approached cautiously, his gaze fixed on the crystalline structure. All right, what do we do now? Kalira pulled out a small device from her belt, its surface covered in alien symbols. I'll interface with the core. If I can communicate with the creature, I might be able to convince it to release us. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You can talk to it? Kalira nodded. In a way. The Narrathin responds to energy patterns, not words. If I can match its frequency. Before she could finish, the chamber shuddered violently. The walls pulsed erratically, the steady rhythm of the creature's heartbeat growing chaotic. What's happening? Ethan shouted, struggling to keep his balance. Kalira's expression darkened. Something's wrong. The creature is in pain. Ethan's eyes widened. Pain? From what? Kalira didn't answer. She knelt by the core, her hands moving rapidly over the device as she tried to stabilize the energy patterns. I need time. Keep an eye on the entrance. Ethan nodded, moving to the edge of the chamber. He didn't know what he was looking for, but his gut told him to stay alert. A new threat. As Ethan stood guard, a low, guttural sound echoed through the chamber. He turned sharply, his heart racing. From one of the side tunnels emerged a group of strange, insect-like creatures, their chitinous bodies glinting in the bioluminescent light. Kalira? Ethan called out, his voice tense. We've got company. Kalira glanced back, her expression grim. Symbiotic parasites. They feed on the Narrathin. If they've made it this far, the creature's life is in danger. Ethan grabbed a nearby piece of jagged debris, holding it like a makeshift weapon. Great. Just what we needed. The parasites hissed, their movements swift and coordinated as they closed in. Ethan swung the debris, managing to knock one away, but another lunged at him, its sharp mandibles snapping dangerously close. Kalira stood abruptly, her device emitting a burst of energy that pulsed through the chamber. The parasites screeched, recoiling as the energy disrupted their movements. Keep them back. Kalira shouted. I'm almost done. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting off the remaining parasites as Kalira worked. Despite the chaos, a strange sense of unity formed between them, a silent understanding that they were stronger together. The release. Kalira's device emitted a final, powerful pulse that filled the chamber with light. The The parasites screeched one last time before retreating into the tunnels, their movements erratic and disoriented. The chamber's rhythm steadied, the Narathan's heartbeat returning to its natural pace. Kalira turned to Ethan, her expression triumphant. "It's done," she said. "The Narathan will release us." Ethan exhaled deeply, his muscles aching from the fight. "About time. Let's get out of here." The walls of the chamber began to shift, the creature's body guiding them toward an exit. As they followed the path, Ethan glanced at Kalira, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" Kalira smiled faintly. "I could say the same about you." As the light of the outside world grew brighter, Ethan couldn't help but feel that their journey was far from over. Chapter 3. The Awakening Inside the Beast. The acrid stench of damp organic material and stale air invaded Ethan's nostrils as he slowly regained consciousness. His eyelids fluttered open to an unfamiliar, dimly lit chamber. The walls seemed alive, pulsing faintly as though breathing. The sensation of being cradled in something that wasn't solid made his stomach churn. Memories of the crash aboard the Celestial Voyager flooded his mind. The explosion, the screams, the violent descent. But this place, this pulsating, living cavity was far from the charred wreckage he expected to wake up in. "You're awake," a voice, soft yet otherworldly, pierced through the haze. Ethan turned his head sharply, finding himself face to face with a figure whose presence was both calming and alarming. She was humanoid, but her features were distinctly alien. Her skin shimmered in gradients of teal and silver, and her hair flowed like liquid light. But what struck him most were her eyes, large, luminous, and filled with curiosity and faint worry. She was crouched nearby, her posture tense yet graceful. "Who are you?" Ethan croaked, his throat dry and voice hoarse. "I am Kalara," she replied, her tone soothing. "You're lucky to be alive. The beast accepted you." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Beast?" Kalara gestured around them. "We are inside a Kalavax, a living organism that roams this planet. It devoured part of the wreckage and us. You wouldn't have survived the crash otherwise." Ethan blinked, trying to comprehend her words. "You're saying we're inside a giant alien creature?" "Yes," Kalara replied simply, her luminous eyes scanning him for injuries. "The Kalavax is ancient and massive. It swallows what it finds, but its internal systems preserve some of what it consumes. It likely saw us as something worth keeping." "Preserve?" Ethan echoed, his stomach twisting. "So what, we're its pets? Food for later?" Kalara shook her head. "Not food. It doesn't digest sentient beings. At least, not immediately. We have some time, but we must act quickly to find a way out." A fragile alliance. Ethan struggled to his feet, his limbs weak and shaky. The chamber they were in was vaguely spherical, with walls made of a strange, gelatinous substance that shimmered faintly under a bioluminescent glow. Small, vein-like structures pulsed rhythmically, giving the impression that the entire space was alive. Kalara stood gracefully, offering him a hand for support. Though hesitant, Ethan took it, her grip surprisingly firm despite her delicate appearance. "Why are you helping me?" he asked warily. "I've never seen your kind before. You're not human." Kalara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And you're not Letherian. Yet here we are, both trapped in this place. If we don't work together, neither of us will leave it alive." Ethan frowned but couldn't argue with her logic. He glanced around the chamber, noticing several tunnels branching out like arteries. "Any idea which way leads out?" Kalara's gaze flickered with uncertainty. "The Kalavax is vast, and its inner structure constantly shifts. It's difficult to navigate, but I've been inside one before. There are exit points openings it uses to expel waste and debris." Ethan grimaced. "Great. So, we're looking for the back door of a giant alien stomach." Kalara ignored his sarcasm, already moving toward one of the tunnels. "Stay close. The Kalavax is not empty. Other things it swallows might not be as dormant as you'd hope." "Other things?" Ethan muttered, his unease growing. "Fantastic." The first encounter. The tunnels were narrow and claustrophobic, their walls slick with a mucus-like substance that made every step treacherous. Ethan followed Kalara closely, his eyes darting around nervously. The faint, rhythmic pulsing of the Kalavax's interior was accompanied by strange, distant sounds, low groans, squelches, and an occasional skittering that set his teeth on edge. "Do you even know where you're going?" he asked after what felt like an hour of aimless wandering. Kalara paused, her luminous eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. "I'm following the airflow. The exit points are usually connected to ventilation channels. If we can find one, it'll lead us out." Ethan was about to respond when a sudden growl echoed through the tunnel. Both of them froze, the sound sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "What was that?" he whispered. Kalara's expression grew tense. "One of the other things." The growl grew louder, followed by a wet, slithering sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Ethan's heart pounded as a shadow emerged from the tunnel ahead, a massive, multi-limbed creature with glistening, chitinous skin and razor-sharp appendages. "Run!" Kalara hissed, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him down a side tunnel just as the creature lunged. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing them to crawl as the creature pursued, its grotesque limbs scraping against the walls with an ear-splitting screech. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he scrambled after Kalara, his palms slipping on the slimy floor. "Do you have a plan?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the tunnel. "Keep moving." Kalara snapped. "I'll handle it." They reached a larger chamber, and Kalara spun around, her hands glowing with a faint, ethereal light. She raised her arms, and a burst of energy shot from her palms, striking the creature and sending it reeling. The beast screeched in fury, but the glow in Kalara's hands grew brighter as she prepared another strike. Ethan watched in awe as she unleashed a second blast, the creature retreating into the darkness with a guttural roar. The glow in Kalara's hands faded, and she staggered slightly, her breathing heavy. "That was amazing," Ethan said, his admiration genuine. Kalara didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the tunnel where the creature had vanished. "It won't stay gone for long. We need to move." A glimpse of hope. As they continued through the Kalavax's labyrinthine interior, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at Kalara. Her abilities, her calm under pressure, was all so far beyond anything he'd ever seen. He wanted to ask more about her, about where she came from, but the tense atmosphere made conversation difficult. Eventually, they reached a larger chamber with a faint breeze flowing through it. Kalara's eyes lit up with relief. "We're close. This air leads to an exit point." Ethan grinned, the first spark of hope igniting in his chest. Finally, some good news. But their relief was short-lived. The ground beneath them suddenly trembled, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. The Kalavax itself seemed to react, its walls pulsating violently as if it were in pain. "What's happening?" Ethan shouted, struggling to stay on his feet. Kalara's expression grew grim. "The creature we fought, it must have disturbed the Kalavax's internal systems. It's reacting defensively." "Defensively?" Ethan repeated, panic rising in his voice. "What does that mean?" Kalara grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the source of the breeze. "It means we need to move faster. Now." Chapter 4. The Beast's Redemption. The pulsating walls of the Rezaran beast glowed faintly, casting a dim light that shimmered over the small, makeshift shelter Ethan and Sarah had built deep within its cavernous interior. Days had passed since they had discovered the shocking truth. The creature that had become their unwilling refuge was no mere beast, it was a living ship, an ancient bioorganic vessel designed by an unknown race. Yet its once noble purpose had been corrupted by centuries of neglect and despair, transforming it into a predator of the void. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously piecing together scraps of metal and wiring scavenged from the creature's internal systems. His makeshift workstation was cluttered, but his mind was sharp, every movement purposeful. Nearby, Sarah knelt beside a small bioluminescent pool, her delicate, clawed fingers tracing patterns in the glowing liquid. "It's fighting us," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her luminous eyes reflected the faint blue of the pool as she gazed into its depths. "It doesn't want us here." Ethan didn't look up from his work. "I know. That's why we need to fix this fast." "The systems are ancient," Sarah continued, her tone tinged with both wonder and frustration. "More advanced than anything I've ever seen. But they're broken, decayed. The beast doesn't even realize what it was meant to be." Ethan set down his tools and leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. Then we'll remind it. This thing, it's alive, Sarah. It's not just some mindless monster. Somewhere deep inside, it remembers. Sarah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. And if it doesn't? Then we'll die trying, Ethan said simply. The beast awakens. Their plan was as audacious as it was desperate. Using the fragments of technology they'd scavenged, they would attempt to access the beast's neural network, a vast, bioorganic system that controlled its every function. If they could repair even a fraction of the corrupted pathways, they might be able to communicate with the creature and convince it to release them. But there were risks. The beast's neural network was unstable, its systems fragmented and erratic. Attempting to interface with it could trigger violent reactions, or worse, it could overwhelm their minds completely. Ethan and Sarah worked tirelessly, their survival instincts pushing them beyond the limits of exhaustion. Sarah's knowledge of bioorganic technology was invaluable, her understanding of the creature's biology far surpassing anything Ethan could have achieved alone. Meanwhile, Ethan's ingenuity and resourcefulness turned broken fragments of machinery into functional tools, each one a small miracle born of necessity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the interface was ready. Ethan stood before the glowing tendrils of the neural conduit, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, glancing at Sarah. She nodded, her expression resolute. "If we don't do this, the beast will consume us eventually. We have no choice." Taking a deep breath, Ethan reached out and placed his hand on the conduit. The tendrils pulsed in response, their light intensifying as they wrapped around his arm. A sudden jolt of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred as his mind was pulled into the creature's consciousness. A memory of stars. Ethan found himself standing in a vast, empty expanse, the void around him shimmering with faint, ethereal light. He was no longer in his body. His consciousness had been transported into the beast's neural network, a fragmented tapestry of memories and sensations. Before him loomed a colossal figure, its form shifting and amorphous, composed of light and shadow. It was the essence of the Rosarin beast, a reflection of its consciousness. "Why are you here?" The figure's voice echoed, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through Ethan's very being. "We're trying to help you," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence of the creature. "You're not just a predator. You were something more once. Let us help you remember." The figure's form flickered, its light dimming. "I was a vessel, a guide through the stars. But I am broken, forgotten. What purpose remains for the broken?" Ethan stepped forward, his determination unwavering. "Purpose doesn't vanish just because you're damaged. You still have a choice. You can save us and yourself." For a moment, the creature was silent. Then, its form began to change, shifting into a kaleidoscope of images: distant stars, thriving civilizations, and a fleet of majestic bioorganic vessels, all moving in harmony. Ethan realized he was witnessing the beast's memories, fragments of a time when it had been part of something far greater. "I was part of the Lasari Armada," the beast said, its voice filled with both sorrow and longing. "We were created to protect, to guide, but I was left behind. I fell into darkness. I became this." "You can be more than what you've become," Ethan said, "but you have to trust us." The beast's redemption. As Ethan's connection to the neural network deepened, Sarah worked tirelessly to stabilize the interface, her hands a blur of motion as she adjusted the delicate components. The beast's body trembled around them, its massive form reacting to the changes in its neural pathways. "Ethan," Sarah called out, her voice urgent. "Whatever you're doing, keep going. It's working." Ethan's consciousness pulsed with the beast's thoughts and emotions, their minds intertwining in a strange, symbiotic dance. He felt its pain, its fear, and its overwhelming desire to be whole again. "We can do this together," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The beast's form steadied, its light growing brighter. "I will try." Slowly, the creature began to change. Its body shifted and reconfigured, its jagged, predatory features softening as its bioorganic systems repaired themselves. The cavernous interior where Ethan and Sarah had taken refuge transformed, the once hostile environment becoming a sanctuary. Sarah stared in awe as the glowing tendrils around her pulsed with life, their energy vibrant and harmonious. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan opened his eyes, the connection severed as the beast's transformation completed. He stumbled back, his legs unsteady, but Sarah was there to catch him. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "You brought it back." A new beginning. The Razaran beast, no longer a mindless predator, lifted its massive form from the barren surface of the asteroid where it had lain dormant for centuries. Ethan and Sarah stood at the viewport of a newly revealed observation chamber, watching as the stars came into view. The creature's voice resonated through the chamber, calm and purposeful. "I am grateful. You have given me a second chance." Ethan smiled, his exhaustion tempered by a deep sense of accomplishment. "Just don't eat anyone else, all right?" The beast let out a low, rumbling sound that Ethan chose to interpret as laughter. Sarah stepped closer to him, her glowing eyes reflecting the stars outside. "What now?" she asked. Ethan shrugged. "We find a new path. Together." As the Razaran beast soared into the depths of space, its passengers felt a sense of hope they hadn't known in years. They were no longer alone, and neither was the beast. Together, they would carve out a future among the stars, a future born from redemption and resilience.